we felt like we wanted some extra adventure. So we bought this boat and we've been living aboard full time for about 1.5 years at this point.
Since we left the UK in August 2022, we've now sailed about 3,000 nautical miles, which feels like a really long way. We've obviously had our share of great experiences, but also some really terrifying ones. We've grounded the boat, we've hit rocks, we flooded the engine with salt water, we ripped a sail, we've suffered with seasickness a lot, and I had a really severe level of sailing anxiety. So living on a sailing boat isn't always super easy.
We decided to move on to a boat because we were sort of ended up in a bit of a rut at home. So we lived in the northwest of England and we'd bought a house and we'd renovated it, learned lots of new skills, but we felt like we wanted some extra adventure. So I'd been watching a lot of YouTube videos on house renovations, and then the YouTube algorithm suggested sailing YouTube channels, and then one day I turned around to Flick and suggested, should we buy a boat?
And I was like, no. I didn't even really think about it. I was like, absolutely not. This is not in my life plan. I'd never really sailed before either, but Joe had some sailing background and had sailed most of his life. And we didn't talk about it again for I think it was a few months. Yeah. And meanwhile I was sort of reflecting and being like, oh, maybe actually this could be the adventure that we've been looking for. But I wanted to set some boundaries as to how we did it. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't sell our house. Like, I didn't want to get off the housing ladder. I wanted to not quit my job. I'd been freelancing for like 5 years, I think, at this point, and I didn't want to lose any of that I'd spent time building up. And I wanted to make sure that if we did it in a sustainable way where we weren't just burning through our life savings. So I went to Joe and said, like, okay, these are what I'm thinking. Like, yeah, we could do it, but if we did it this way, and that's kind of where it started.
So we bought this boat, Nendaz, back in March 2022. Nendaz is a 1989 GIB-SEA 402. She's 12.4 meters long, about 3.8 meters wide, and she's got a draft, which is how deep she sits in the water, of about 2 meters. We paid about the equivalent of $48,000 US on Nendaz, which is quite cheap for a 40-foot boat. But then we did have a lot of money to spend on her to make her fit for full-time modern living. So one of the first big jobs was to do a total rewire on Nendaz. So we now have 3 200 amp hour lithium iron phosphate batteries, which gives us 600 amp hours of total capacity. What this means for us is that we can run electrical cooking equipment. So we've got an induction hob and an air fryer, and that is our only way of cooking on the boat. We do not have gas anymore. To charge those batteries, well, there's a few methods. The first method is we can charge the batteries off of the engine via an alternator. And the second way is via solar panels. We have 875 watts of solar panels, and they are our primary charging source. And the third option, which is more of a backup option for when there's multiple days of no sun, is we've got a 2,200 watt petrol generator. After we'd finished all of the electrical wiring, we then moved on to the wet side of things, where we basically replumbed the boat and we replaced all of the very old hose, and we installed 2 water tanks. These are flexible bladder type things, and we have 400 litres of capacity.
We make sure that our water is divided into different sources, because when you're living off grid, if you have one massive 400 litre tank, and if that gets compromised, so you get like a saltwater leak into it, then you end up with your entire water supply that's compromised. Whereas ours is split into a 200 litre tank, a 120 litre tank, and then we have about 80 litres in jerry cans. So we then have multiple different sources that we can always draw upon if we did have any problems with water.
We also did things like we created an entirely new navigation panel, so a brand new chart plotter, battery monitoring system, new switchboards, VHF radio, all the works. and we had to service the engine. There were some parts that were very corroded and damaged, and one of the other large upgrades we finished with was the one thing that we didn't do ourselves, and that was the stainless steel stern arch, which acts as both our dinghy transport and also our home for all our solar panels, or most of them. It ended up costing us around $35,000. It becomes very hard to distinguish between what was an upgrade and what was sort of a mandatory maintenance job.
So since we left the UK in August 2022, we've now sailed about 3,000 nautical miles. So we left from Plymouth in the UK, and we sailed directly from Plymouth down the coast of Spain and Portugal. We crossed over to Morocco. We wintered there for 3 months, and then we sailed to Gibraltar and then to Sardinia, and then from Italy to Greece. And we are now just by Athens. The lifestyle of living, sailing, travelling, working on a sailboat sounds pretty cool, right? But it's not all like blue skies and flat seas. It can be quite stressful. I compare it a lot to a roller coaster. You have the most incredible highs and amazing days, but then everything's extremes, right? So you also have the lowest of lows that I've personally ever experienced, and most stressful times. So if you ask us one day how we find this lifestyle, we might be like, it's amazing, it's so fun, like we love it. And then you ask us the next day and we'll be like, it's awful, take me home, this is dreadful. So we've obviously had our share of great experiences, but also some really terrifying ones. We went through a series of unfortunate events, I would say. So from losing our mainsail on one of the most treacherous or infamous stretches of water, to we grounded the boat, we hit a rock, we lost our prop shaft, all these bad things happened over quite a condensed period of time, and for me personally it left me feeling quite broken, and I think my mental health was quite affected, and I had a really severe level of sailing anxiety where it got to the point where we would be in a marina and the idea of leaving the marina the next morning or something would have me just crying on the stairs to Joe, being like, I don't want to go. And when we did leave, I'd then be lying down below in a full anxiety fit, I guess. Totally useless. So it meant that Joe was single-handedly sailing a lot of the Atlantic coast. It actually took 3 months of us stopping sailing in Morocco for me to be able to reset my mindset and come at it with a more positive approach. But, it's very easy to look at this lifestyle and be like, oh my God, how incredible. But it's definitely not always easy. It's important, I think, that people understand that when you are a liveaboard sailor, you're totally self-reliant. So you are the cook, you're the cleaner, you're the plumber, you're the engineer, you're the electrician, but you're also the first responder to a medical emergency, you're the lifeguard, you're everything else. So yeah, I think that adds a different level of stress maybe to the experience.
Yeah. You very much have to be resilient and self-reliant, because even if you were to call for rescue, by the time the rescue boat might get to you, it might already be too late. Your boat might be on the rocks and sinking, or already sunk. So you have to be able to fix all these problems yourself, and it's really important that you do.
We knew that there'd be sailing related challenges, but we didn't realise how uncomfortable it would be in the peak of summer on the sailing boat, where you have no aircon and no real way to cool off. So we were in Sardinia in this horrible heat wave earlier this year, and I think it got up to 48 degrees and it was roasting.
You would jump in the sea and it wouldn't really cool you down, and we had this prolonged period of just heat for weeks. And that was probably the biggest surprise that I didn't really anticipate, is you end up sort of just kind of going into a hibernation mode. You just sort of stay down below out the sun. You occasionally jump in the sea to cool off a little bit, but then you don't really get to do anything. Like, it's very hard to explore some of the places when the temperatures are that hot.
It's also interesting, I thought that when we first got the boat that I'd be on the bow sunbathing the whole time. I'm not, I'm hiding from the sun the whole time because you're just so overexposed to it.
In reality, you just spend like 90% of your time hiding from the sun. Some people say that living on a boat is expensive, and some people say it's very cheap. So, which one is it? Well, it's an impossible question, isn't it? It's sort of how long is a piece of string? Everybody lives to certain standards and has certain expectations. For us, personally, we'd probably spend around $1,500 to $2,000 a month between us. And that would cover groceries, eating out at restaurants or bars, and occasionally buying some treats like new fishing tackle or a spear gun and things like that. So day-to-day costs, they can vary a lot. We find that it's definitely cheaper than being on land, and the principal reason for that is that you're no longer paying rent or you're no longer paying a mortgage. In addition to that, you've ditched all of the other ad hoc land bills like your council tax or utility bills for gas, electricity and all those things. You don't have a car now, so you don't have to pay for insurance or fuel and things like that. Sure, we've got to buy fuel for the boat, but that's generally a lot less than what you would spend on fuel for a car. Having said that, there are some usually pretty strong barriers to entry for the boating world. The fact that you need to have the money in the first place to buy the boat, and once you've bought the boat, generally speaking, you're going to have to spend more money on it to get it ready for full-time cruising. And so that's probably the trickiest part of the budget balancing, is finding that initial pot of cash to actually get into or make the step into this lifestyle. Once you're in it, it is, for us at least, cheap.
People also live a lot cheaper than we do, and obviously there's people who live in a lot more of an expensive way than we do. A great way that we find of cutting down our costs is avoiding marinas, so we really invested at the start in our anchor and chain setup so that we feel confident in a lot of strong winds and things at anchor.
If you were to sit in a marina, it would trash your monthly budget, and there's just no way we'd be able to afford it. So we've been at anchor for well over 6 months this season, and in that time we've spent, I think it's 5 days in a marina total. So how do we earn money whilst we live on a boat full time? Well, we're very fortunate in that we still own the house that we used to live in. We now rent this out and we receive an income off of that after paying for various fees and mortgage costs. In addition to that, we also both work part-time whilst on the boat. So I work part-time as an accountant. I've set up a small business, just me on my own, doing the accounts and tax advice for other small businesses.
So I'm a marketing consultant. I specialise also in small businesses, particularly within retail, and helping them grow through digital marketing.
In addition to that, we're on YouTube at Sailing Nendaz, and we're able to do all of this because we have a stable internet connection. So we now have Starlink on the boat, which enables us to have super fast internet wherever we are in the world. It doesn't matter how remote a anchorage you're sitting at, you will always have internet. So Starlink costs €100 a month for us, but the pricing is different depending on where you are in the world.
On board with us, we have our 3-year-old Vizsla called Walter. He has been an absolute dream when it came to moving to being a boat dog. The biggest challenge is getting them to pee or do their business on the boat. So when we had Walter as a puppy, we taught him to go to the loo on AstroTurf or like fake grass. And when we moved down to the boat, we moved the artificial grass onto the bow of the boat, and he immediately pretty much adapted. He's absolutely fine when we're sailing, but if it's particularly bad and we want him to be in the cockpit with us, then we'll clip him into the cockpit. He also has a life jacket that he wears, or a buoyancy aid I guess it is, but most of the time he'll stay down below so that then he's safe and not going to be rolling around too much. He's quite a high energy dog, so he needs a lot of exercise, but actually he gets more exercise than he did when we were in Manchester and we were both working full time. He's also around us a lot more than he was back then, and I think overall he's generally just a lot happier.
The best part about this lifestyle is by far the people you meet. It's this cruising community, this community of other sailors. So when you come across another cruiser with a problem on their boat, we're obviously always wanting to help. And it's the same, it's reciprocal. So whenever we've had our problems, the cruising community, the way it pulls together to sort of help you in your lowest of lows is just amazing. We've also met people that we would have never have met normally in our day-to-day lives, from different countries, different cultures.
Over the last year and a half, I've had lots of different scenarios playing out in my head, but I think ultimately we will just keep checking in with each other and see if we're still enjoying it. And as long as the answer to that is yes, then we'll continue cruising. I do think at some point we'll definitely move back to land life, but we'll definitely try and take as much that we've learned from this experience, particularly in terms of being self-sufficient, and take that back to land life and try and apply it in kind of every way that we can.
Yeah, I think we'd quite like to set up an off-grid homestead style environment for ourselves.
That's the dream. The next dream.
Subscribe to Exploring Alternatives and check out our playlists for more videos like this. You can also follow Flick and Joe on their YouTube channel at Sailing Nendaz. Thanks for watching.